Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Happy Hump Day Wednesday here in Hawaii. Hope you guys all doing all right. Hope you guys having a great week so far. It's the middle of the week, and we got a good show for you guys tonight. Doctors Lee Altenberg and Tim Brown will be joining us to go over the numbers from today, our COVID numbers. I know a lot of people are over COVID already. I think a lot of people are just tired of hearing about COVID, but I do want to keep the Wednesday open for the updates because I think it's important. I think a lot of people needs to know. Um, Title is off. What title, George? Title is off. Not sure what that means. Is it Friday yet? Not yet, Vaughn. Sorry. But yeah, I think it's important that a release have that day dedicated for those that want to get an update from the medical experts, the scientists. Oh, oh, okay, I got it. Um, because I think a lot of people are still interested. Hi, Patsy. My wife is watching from the living room. She made me an amazing pasta dish with fresh ono from my good buddies who caught some fish the other day, and they blessed us with some ahi and some ono. Joey and Joe Adric, father and son, they all went out and caught some fish. So awesome. Yeah, I am feeling better, pops. A little bit better. Every day gets better. Every day gets better. But I just gotta try to take it easy and not overdo it, so I can fully recover and be back to normal. So anyway, like I said, tonight, Dr. Lee Altenberg, Dr. Tim Brown, looking forward to the discussion because I think a lot is going on. I think COVID is still rampant. I told you guys on Monday night, my oldest brother has it for the third time. Uh, Third time. Oh, is my title? Is that title you're talking about? Hang on. Oh yeah, what happened? Oh, I know what it is. I know what it is. Hang on. I gotta fix this. Sorry about that, bro. Hang on. Still not back to normal. Okay. Oh man, it's showing all of that on all the streams. Son of a gun. So sorry. Um, yeah, that's what happens when you get out of practice because we haven't done it for so long. Water tonight. Trying to stay hydrated. But again, I appreciate you guys joining tonight. Um, I am forgiven. I now I got to go back and fix the Twitter and the all the other ones. But anyway, it is what it is. Just goes to show I'm human like everybody else. So anyway, Eric is asking, have I recovered? Recovering. I am recovering. Uh, this, yeah, still No, not coffee, bro. I'm having some ice cold water. Yeah, so sad. 23 more deaths. Yes, really, 23 more deaths. That's over three a day. So I don't know how. I don't know how. Thank you, Judy. I don't know how our state can still continue to just ignore it. Ignore it. I don't get it. Um, Realize that YouTube is live and the others are slightly delayed. I'm not sure how that works, Sam. It simultaneously streams it to all the platforms, and I would assume still, there's maybe some delay. But anyway, main thing is we get our guests on. I know last week we had some problems with Ikaika, or Monday we had some problems with Ikaika's connection. He had to change laptops, and it worked. And I was having some network issues, so I was fading in and out. Hopefully, we fixed it, and hopefully tonight will go smooth as silk. Kai's Ike is saying, I think in 6 months' time, 500 deaths. Well, listen, guys, it's quite clear, and the two doctors that we have on tonight, right? Dr. Lee Altenberg and Tim Brown, they have been pretty much on target with their projections, with their estimates based on science, right? Based on math, based on trends. And I think our government should pay attention to that because this is all fact based and not politically based. Um, if someone catches it 3 times, do they wear a mask? And if so, what does that tell us? Well, I think like Dr. Um, Jerome Kim said, Scott, the masks protect much less protection for yourself. The protection of the mask is protecting others, I think, and that is why when we lift the mask mandates, you get a whole lot more infection because more people are spreading. So I think the to answer your question, what does it tell me? It tells me that the fact that we got some irresponsible and disrespectful people that continuously go out without wearing a mask around other people is creating this to spread. That's what the message I get from, and my brother's living proof. The guy, he's immunocompromised. He's very careful, always wears a mask. But the problem is, not everyone else is wearing a mask. And again, like Dr. Jerome Kim said, uh, the mask protects others much better than it protects yourself. So that's where it lies. That's how I see it. I think to think that masks don't work is not a wise opinion. I think we know, but we all got to wear the mask. You see what I'm saying? If some people insist that they ain't gonna wear a mask, then we'll never see the end of this. We will never see the end of the spread of this virus. And we see it in the numbers, we see it in the data, we see it in the facts. When mask mandates were lifted, every single time we had spikes. So what does that tell you? I think that tells you that masks work. But people will be out there insisting that they don't work. There's a study that says it doesn't work, and oh gosh, just look at the trends. One time, could be anything. 2 times, okay, starting to become real. The third time, the third time, it's you can pretty much assume that that is the trend and that is what's going to happen. People who are sick need to stay home. The problem, Scotty, we know this, right? 40% of the infections are asymptomatic. 40%. They don't know they're sick. This is the problem, right? People are going out and they don't know that they're sick. They're not going out trying to maliciously infect people. The fact that they're going out and thinking that it's not an issue and they're going out and cough. I had to go to Honolulu for my procedure last week, and coming home, no one wore a mask. None of the flight attendants wore a mask. The two captains or the two pilots went into the cockpit. None of them had a mask. The guy in the aisle across from me at the window seat, no mask, coughing like that guy should have not been on a plane. But again, right? No need mask, right? Because my freedom is more important. My freedom is more important. So you go ahead and go infect as many people as you can because you're a disrespectful person. Going in an airplane in the tube, coughing, you know you're sick, and you still went on that plane without a mask. Masks protect others more than it protects yourself. So it's all about, again, right? What's the Pono thing to do? Wear your mask. Wear your mask because it's proven to work. And I'm over people trying to convince me that masks don't work. I really am. I don't have time or energy to debate that anymore. And we'll hear about that tonight when our doctors come on. 40% of the infections are asymptomatic. And it may be even more than that. I will get the accurate number tonight. That's the last I read with the new numbers coming out. 40% of these infections are asymptomatic. So they don't know they are sick. So they're not going to stay home because they think they're okay, but they're not. Anyway. All right, Dr. Altenberg, welcome to the jungle, my friend.
Aloha, Mel.
How are you?
Okay, how are you doing?
I'm a lot better now that we can hear you and see you, and there's no glitches. We've been having a little bit of technical issues lately. Somebody said I'm not looking well, so I'm drinking water, guys. I'm drinking water.
2 weeks ago, a car crashed and knocked down 2 telephone poles on Oahu Avenue. and our internet was down for 20 hours.
Oh,
They had 6 cherry pickers out on the street trying to fix it. You can imagine that.
yeah, yeah. I saw yesterday on the Big Island, a contractor accidentally ran over the Hawaiian Telecom fiber optic cable, and they completely cut off phones and internet. 911, no, nothing worked, and they encourage everyone, if you get sick or there's an emergency, drive to the nearest police station or
Oh,
hospital.
jeez.
But I gotta say, they got it up. They got it up relatively quickly. Okay, the problem is too many people do not want to spend the rest of their lives masked. That's why I feel mandated only in public transportation as a compromise we could get the population to go along with. Well, Scotty, I do not want to spend the rest of my life being masked. I definitely don't want that. But I honestly don't understand the logic of you're saying that you support for public transportation, but only public transportation, like the virus only attacks public transportation. The problem is it's everywhere, and I don't know about a compromise. I mean, this is a public health and safety issue. The people just got to be much more safe and careful and respectful. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, welcome, Dr. Tim Brown. Sorry for my little vent. I'm trying to catch up on some questions as we go along.
No problem. I vent all the time.
Well, appreciate you guys coming on. It's been a while. It's Wednesday. Numbers are out. And what's more interesting is the reports that we're hearing from across the country and around the world regarding Omicron and these new variants. So I don't know where to start. Dr. Lee, you came on first, so I'll let you start. What's your take on what's your take on today's numbers? The 23 deaths really shocked me, but
yeah,
there's a whole lot more to the report.
Well, first, I want to address what you just brought up, which was the comment that what was that? Repeat the comment they made about masking. Do we have to mask forever? What was that?
Scotty said the problem is too many people do not want to spend the rest of their lives masked. That's why I feel mandated only on public transportation as a compromise we could get the population to go along with.
Okay, so what's the main false assumption that was behind that statement? If I can be in a lecture mode here, class, what was the main fallacy behind that statement?
Well, I mean, I think the inference that public transportation is unsafe and should be masked. People should wear a mask.
No, I'm trying to get at something deeper, which is the false assumption is this is as good as it gets, that this is how it's going to be forever, and once you assume that, it's like, okay, do we have to live differently in our day-to-day lives from how we lived in 2019 forever? And then people say no. All right, we're not going to mask forever, and so we're not going to mask now. But what's wrong with that assumption is that this is as good as it gets, and that we're going to have this situation with these high numbers forever. Now that I mean, to me, is an unacceptable state because of the number of deaths and hospitalizations, and not to mention long COVID, which is going to disable some substantial chunk of the population and cause long-term health problems for, there's estimates between 5 and 20% for other long-term health problems. I haven't seen the good estimates on how many are really disabled, but it's still a fraction, and nobody knows how to eliminate that risk. So why isn't this it? Why isn't this as good as human existence is going to be from now on in terms of this disease? Well, because there's continual vaccine development and there's continual development of treatments. They are still rationing Paxlovid to the high-risk population. So not everybody can avail themselves of its benefits. And, so I think the problem is that by prematurely concluding that this is all we've got to throw at this disease, that then we say this is as good as it gets. And then the next conclusion is, we can't live our lives differently from how we used to because this is it forever. So if suppose somebody said, in 6 months' time, we're going to have vaccines that will really prevent infection from the Omicron, and if you can hold out for another 6 months with masking, this will greatly cut down on the number of deaths and the other long-term sickness. And can you hold out for another 6 months? Suppose it was, can you hold in a year? We're sure that we're going to really have the preventative vaccines, and all of this whole thing will be over. Can you hold out for a year? I think people might be able to consider that. But when people are told this is as good as it gets, then they say, okay, well, I'm just going to go back to living how I was. And but as good as it gets means like 10 times the number of annual deaths from COVID as we were getting from seasonal influenza, if I got my numbers right. So that's really, to me, an unacceptable forever in the future.
Thanks, Doc. Dr. Brown.
Well, I think following on what Dr. Altenberg just said, I think there are a lot of issues involved here. One is an issue of political will. And that affects many of the things he was talking about. I mean, he was talking about, yes, new vaccine development. He was talking about new drug development. I mean, all of these things are gated by the willingness of our government basically to invest in these things. And quite frankly, Washington has shown a great reluctance in investing in COVID, investing in monkeypox, in dealing with a lot of the problems that are out there right now. A substantial portion of our Congress, I won't mention which party, basically stands in the way of any new COVID funding. And that includes the funding for the vaccines that we're going to need in the fall. That would include funding for continuing access to Paxlovid. That would include funding for continuing monoclonal antibody access. So, I mean, part of it needs to be that the people need to bring more pressure on their politicians to do what's right, to do what's necessary, basically, to move us from a state in which, frankly, we should be in masking mandates right now. If you actually look at what's been going on in this state, the Hospital Association basically has requested that the governor declare a state of emergency because they are stretched to the limits right now. And they're not stretched to the limits by the number of people with COVID in the hospital. They are stretched to the limits by the number of workers with COVID who are out. And so they're short 1,000 healthcare workers at this point because they're all out sick, or they're isolating because they've been exposed to somebody who had COVID. And all of this is a consequence of the fact that we've done nothing to arrest the transmission of COVID in this state. We basically have taken this let her rip attitude, not even encouraging people to mask. Yes, our public officials, if they're asked directly, will say, yeah, we think people ought to mask. But do they actually get on their bully pulpit, get out there and actually talk to the people and say, look, we're in a situation where our healthcare system is once again on the brink. We really need you to help us out and to wear a mask right now. That, to me, is the minimum ask we should have of our politicians, especially those people who are currently running for governor. They ought to be willing to get out there and ask for that. We've got school starting next week, and we're going in without a mask mandate for children when we're in the middle of a surge. Come on, get real. That was one of the things the governor had right in the spring, was that we ought to be maintaining the masking. If you want to keep kids in school, the way to keep kids in school is to keep a mask mandate in place for the schools, because that will keep the kids from getting infected in school. It will keep them from taking it home to their families from school. And we should also be encouraging those kids to get vaxxed. And again, we've got relatively low coverage of vaccines among children at this point. So I think there are a huge number of issues in terms of the lack of political will on the part of our entire political system to address this issue and to address it directly and forcibly. And like I said before, we are once again with a healthcare system on the brink of failure. We have essential operations, essential procedures that have been delayed for 2 years or longer that are now becoming critical where people need them basically to maintain their health. And again, our hospitals are basically at the limit or they can't provide the healthcare workers we need to make it happen. Come on, people, get real. This is ridiculous. I mean, we literally have the hospital association asking the governor to declare an emergency. He's off at a governor's conference right now. Lieutenant governor is certainly not going to do anything with the election coming up. All three of our Democratic gubernatorial candidates, so let's be real, are the only three who have a chance of actually winning the governorship here in the state. All three of them have come out against masking in schools starting next week. So tell me, where is the public response? Really, where is it? Where's the social responsibility? Where's the ask of the people of Hawaii to watch out for each other and to take care of each other? Because I'm not seeing it.
Well, I think Doc, the constant messaging or lack of messaging or the mixed messaging from our state. Imagine the restrictions that were placed, or I'll call it the safety protocols that were implemented when we were nowhere near the hospital crisis we are at today. Remember, everything was based on hospital, being able to manage the hospitals. And when that became an issue, we would start to implement the protocols again. Now you have Rathan, whatever his name is, begging the governor to declare an emergency. The same guy that was standing at the side of the governor when the governor was so excited to lift safety protocols. The same guy that said, we are managing well, when they weren't. If you spoke to the individual hospitals, they weren't managing well. But as the spokesman for the hospitals, he said they were, because everyone was anxious to get to some sort of normalcy, and we are paying the price today. And you're exactly right. While I was at Queens, I spoke to a couple of the nurses, and between 300 and 400 nurses are out at any given time, and they are working to the bone to try to treat as many patients as they can. And like you said, he's not even here. No one has come out. I mean, you hear it on the news, you hear the hospital guy begging. No one from the executive branch or legislative branch has come forward and said, hey, we need to do something. Wait till after the election, I think maybe things will be different. But it's disgusting. You mentioned it, political will. These guys don't want to rock the boat anymore. They see it as a very controversial issue that's going to turn off voters. And at the end of the day, who suffers, right? The people, the patients that cannot get their surgeries.
But I think, fundamentally, this betrays the whole lie of the current CDC hospitalization metrics. Okay. The theory behind those metrics was that when a hospital system was driven to the limit, those metrics would basically pick it up and allow us basically to take the necessary precautions. And those precautions mean slowing the transmission. Well, we've reached that limit. We've reached it both in terms of their metrics. We are orange or red or whatever color you want to call it on the pastel map the CDC puts out now. We are at that level. And at that level, even CDC basically says you really ought to be thinking about mask mandates. And our hospital system is at the limit right now. That's the reports we're getting from everybody within the system. I know that the hospitals on the Big Island are full at this point. And yet, why aren't we doing something about it? Why aren't we calling for measures to stop the transmission? No, all we hear is crickets. I mean, complete, total crickets from anybody in public office right now. They're silent. They don't use their positions basically to do anything. They don't ask people to do anything. And so when people don't hear anything, and when the numbers are coming out once a week and, kind of now reduced to a relatively short story in the paper, how are people to get the information to know that they need to be doing something at this point? All they're hearing is dead silence that implies that nothing's happening and there's nothing to worry about. They don't really hear about the 67 people who died in the last month. They don't hear about the 190 some odd people who went to the hospital last week for COVID or with COVID, whichever. But the bottom line is, they created burden on the hospital system in terms of caring for them, whether it was because they had COVID-related illness, whether they had an illness, pre-existing illness that was pushed over the edge by COVID, or whether they just went because they happen to have COVID. When they're in the hospital, they require additional care, additional precautions that put even more strain on a hospital system that is already at the brink. And like you were saying, at Queens, they don't have 200, 300 nurses on a daily basis. Okay, come on, let's get real here, folks. Where's your compassion and your sympathy for the poor healthcare workers who've been working flat out for the last 2 years, and basically nobody even cares to try to slow the transmission to help them out? I mean, the lack of empathy, the lack of compassion here just amazes
me. Yeah. No disagreement here. No disagreement here. So, what are we to expect going forward with COVID? What's happening around the world? What's happening in our own country? I keep hearing the news reports from other states that they are struggling. Their numbers are climbing. Their hospitalizations and deaths are rising. This BA5 is devastating many areas, including Hawaii. But what's on the horizon? Are we going to see this thing ever fizzle out? Are we going to see additional variants popping up? We still got 2.75, and what's the news? Dr. Altenberg, you got any insights? You got a crystal ball over there?
You want to look at the numbers?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's look at the numbers. Okay, let's see here. Let me bring it up. There we go. Do you see the slide now?
Yep.
There you go. Okay. So here's where we are. So this shows the case numbers for the whole pandemic, and the Delta peak, the BA1 peak, and the BA2 peak. And here we are, and this orange line is the maximum of our case numbers for the past week. And you can see how that compares to the rest of the pandemic. It still puts us in the upper part of the Delta surge. It's nothing compared to the BA1 surge, but this is still high. And you notice the numbers are pretty flat here. If you look at all the previous times that we've had a flat period, they've been during a trough in the numbers. All right. Here we're flat at an extremely high daily case rate. And this is new. This is new for our pandemic numbers. This is something we haven't experienced before, as being flat at this very high rate. And Dr. Brown could probably talk about how it's the trading off between the decline of the BA2 and the rise of the BA5. But it's very interesting to me, at least, that it's so flat. So here's from Walgreens variant tracking for Hawaii. And this red line is the BA4, BA5 line, since BA1 is pretty much gone now. And it shows very high proportion now of all the cases here are BA5. So the chance if you got COVID, or somebody you know got COVID in the past couple of weeks, that it's going to be the BA5 variant. Stop me if you have any questions. So here's the Kinza thermometer reading for Hawaii. We're on this edge of this between high risk and critical, 74. So actually, the other Oahu is higher than that, and the other islands are lower than that. But that's for the entire state. Now, again, the positivity rates are sky high, and if using this estimator that I calculated for estimating the case numbers based on the positivity, and it was trained during this period in here, and you can see it tracks it quite well. even except at the top of the Omicron, the BA1 surge, where the numbers got blown out because the system was overwhelmed. But anyway, it tracked it coming down pretty well. And then we see these two lines start to depart. So this is the blue is our actual recorded case numbers, but the orange is what those case numbers would be based on the positivity rate. And you can see they're way up here. We're still, this is way above the Delta, the peak of the Delta surge, and we're up in the thick of the BA1 surge, but we're still, but we're hanging on there. We're not crashing down the way the BA1 did. Now, if you look at how much this orange line is in excess of the blue line, you can get an idea of how our current case numbers are actually underestimating what they were based on the prior parts of the pandemic for comparison. And here's that ratio. All right, so this was the training period of the estimator. This is when the system got overwhelmed with BA1, and here it is subsequently during the era of home tests. And this number has climbed and climbed and climbed, and now it's about 5 times. So for this positivity rate, during the previous part of the pandemic, we would have had 5 times the cases that we have now. And so there's a chance that our current case numbers are really underestimating the case numbers as they used to be by about 80%. So you have to multiply it by 5 to be able to compare where we are now compared to the prior peaks in the pandemic. So, and this is undoubtedly due to the prevalence of home tests and the drop in the number of the recorded tests that the labs do. And this again may be a bit inflated because people, when they get a positive test at home, they may then want to go into the lab to get a PCR test. And so that would bias the percentage of positivity upward. So the true number is probably somewhere in between. But still, the fact that it keeps climbing and climbing and climbing suggests that the home tests continue to warp our estimation of how bad the pandemic is here in Hawaii based on the daily case numbers. Now here's hospitalizations. So this was the Delta wave last summer into fall. This was the BA1 wave, all right, in the winter. And here we are, the BA2 wave. But now we're into the thick of BA5 in this flat period here. And what's going to happen, I don't know. But because this is a new kind of flat plateau that we haven't experienced before. But the hospitalizations are still substantial. And how do we compare to the rest of the United States in terms of our per capita daily cases? So here's USA in blue, here's Hawaii in orange. And for most of the pandemic, Hawaii did much better than the rest of the United States. It caught up in late 2021, and during the BA1 wave, it was worse, but then it pretty much went back to parity. And then with this BA2 wave, after the end of the mask mandate, Hawaii got twice as bad as the rest of the United States, but now we've fallen back to about the same per capita case rates as the rest of the country. So that's the numbers. So that's all I've got to share there.
Yeah, I think that the week after week, the numbers, the trends are the same. I mean, the predictability of this virus, except for what you're talking about now, that the longer period of flatness is kind of concerning. But we should know, right? We should know what to expect, and we should be able to prepare and be proactive. We just choose not to, and that's the unfortunate part. Dr. Brown, your thoughts, and I know you keep track of what's happening around the world and around the country. What are you thinking right now?
Let me share a slide just to show you what's most likely going on here right now and why we're flat. You see the slide now? Can you pull that up? Yeah, there we go. Okay, this was a fit I did a couple of weeks ago looking at what we knew about the trends in the variant rates and the case numbers that we were getting. And I basically just took the case numbers we had, the percent of each type of variant, focusing on just BA4, BA5, and BA2 or BA 2.12.1, which are really the two major components of our pandemic right now. And you can see that what's been going on is the BA2 is in a pretty substantial decline. Okay, so, if this is, 727, we're down here, the BA2 is pretty much gone. Like the tracking was showing at the Walgreens, basically they're saying about 90% is BA5. I mean, BA4 is just kind of noise. BA5 is really the major game. And so fundamentally, yeah, we're about 90% BA5 at this point. And this shows you basically that the BA5 is slowly increasing, not increasing as fast as we've seen it in some other places. The BA2 is decreasing. Then when we put them together, we get this combined curve, just adding these two curves up. And these green points, and this is a fit for Oahu, I should point out. These green points basically are the actual daily 7-day average case numbers that have been reported over the last month and a half at this point, a little over a month. So you can see we're actually tracking that pretty well, and we're kind of in this trough right now. So yeah, we've been flat for the last 3 weeks. This is 3 weeks of data right here, more or less flat, right? Not going up, not going down. And, and that's holding up pretty much across the state. If I look at the weekly cases by island, flat on Hawaii. Maui's dropping a little bit, but now they're back up again. Kauai's been dropping a bit, but still, comparatively flat. Oahu, a little bit of up and down here. But it's also worth realizing that the daily test numbers are still going downward. Okay, so this is the actual trend. You can see it going downward since early June in terms of the number of daily tests that are being done. And I think, that again probably reflects more use of at-home test. I think people are getting more comfortable with those now and are using them. I think somebody in the comments had mentioned something about having challenges and trying to get a PCR. Certain places give you hassles about them, or they don't particularly want to do them, and so on. So, that's certainly going to drive our case numbers down further. So fundamentally, it's basically this curve, I think, that we're looking at right now. So we're probably going to be flat for at least another 2 to 3 weeks. And what happens after that will depend on whether BA5 really takes off here or doesn't. And right now, that's anybody's guess, to be quite honest. One of the things in our favor is that there is a study out of actually Qatar recently, although that's a young population, 90% of the people are below age 50. But there's a study out of there that shows that people with a recent Omicron infection have about 80% protection against a BA5 infection. Okay, and that's based on a fairly large sample there. So probably what's benefiting us is the fact that our BA2 epidemic was relatively recent. And so there probably is some protection associated with that for people who were infected recently. But normally we expect that protection. The experience with Omicron has been that Omicron protections, both from vaccines and from previous infections, tends to wane pretty quickly. So probably we got 2 or 3 months of protection from that, and then it will probably start to rise again. So, that's probably one of the reasons why we're seeing a more gradual growth of BA5 here than we've seen in a lot of other places. With that said, it's worth noting that many of the countries that are seeing fairly rapid BA5 rises are also seeing doublings and triplings of their hospitalizations. So we do have to be concerned about that, and we have to watch for that. And, as Dr. Altenberg was pointing out, I think I've got the slide here, hospitalizations are fairly flat right now. Okay, they're not going down, they're not going up. They're basically just kind of sitting there. And, that is concerning because while they are flat, the amount of illness that we're seeing among healthcare workers and doctors is basically leaving them understaffed. And that's the real problem right now. It's a staffing problem that has pushed our hospital system to the brink, not a number of people in the hospital with COVID problem. But again, like I said, these people also, everybody who is hospitalized with COVID does provide additional burdens on the hospital system in terms of infection control within the hospitals and keeping further COVID spread from occurring within the hospitals. And that is absolutely critical because it is our most vulnerable residents who end up in the hospital. The elderly are probably much more likely to go to the hospital than others. They are the ones who are also most vulnerable to serious impacts from COVID. So that infection control becomes a substantial burden for the hospitals, but it's absolutely essential to protect the people who are going to those hospitals. So I think that, what we're seeing right now is pretty well explained by this graph. And as you can see, it will probably sustain for at least another couple of weeks, and then we might see a rise. We'll probably have a better sense of this once we see next week's data or the weeks after data about whether that rise is going to be comparatively steep or not. But fundamentally, that's my take on what's happening right now.
Well, a few more weeks of this level, these numbers staying about the same. Interesting, you brought up about people that were recently infected with uh, Omicron 2. My brother is just got COVID again. His third time. He's double vaxxed, double boosted, uh, and this is his third bout with COVID. Thankfully, he qualifies for Paxlovid because he's immunocompromised, and the Paxlovid, he just had it a couple months ago, and he got reinfected again, and he got Paxlovid twice, and the Paxlovid seems to really work quickly on the symptoms, which is a good thing. But what's interesting about his most recent infection, which is right now, he can't taste or smell, which I thought was not the BA.5s with Omicron didn't have that symptom. Is that something that I've never heard? I mean, everyone I've known with the Omicron that got infected with Omicron never lost their taste or smell. So
Well,
I'm hoping it's not either a new variant or remnants of the old Delta. Is that
no,
even possible?
it is possible, although I will say that it still occurs with Omicron. It just occurs at a much lower rate than it did with
Okay.
previous variants. Okay, so it's still documented that the anosmia can still occur with Omicron.
Okay.
There was actually a nice study that came out earlier today that's found that most people, that is resolving by 6 months. They're basically getting their smell and their taste back, which is a good thing. So that the olfactory system basically recovers, I guess, is the good news there. But yeah, I mean, it still can happen. It happens much less frequency. I think my understanding is now something like 5 to 10% at most. It's relatively infrequent. The symptoms associated with the different variants have changed over time, of course, and so that has made a big difference. I think the other thing I would check is, is he on Evusheld? Has he received Evusheld prophylactically? Because if he's immunocompromised, check with him. He should be on Evusheld as well. It gives an additional layer of protection for people who are immunocompromised. And it's a monoclonal antibody. You basically receive it. It's good for about 6 months, and it basically serves a protective effect. So it reduces your chances of getting infected. The unfortunate reality is far too many people don't know about it. People who are immunocompromised don't know about it. Their doctors don't know about it. And the US, we've only used 20% of our supply of it. We got tons of it sitting on the shelves, waiting for people to come in and get treated with it, but people aren't aware of it and the doctors aren't aware of it. So anybody who's immunocompromised, ask them if they've seen their doctor about getting Evusheld. If they haven't, then they should go see their doctor. If their doctor doesn't know about it, get another doctor. Because if you're immunocompromised, you should definitely be on Evusheld. It's another major, remember we've talked about the Swiss cheese model of protection. It's another layer of Swiss cheese in there that will provide more protection to people. Your vaccines are one layer, your mask is another layer, your past infection, if you had one, is another layer. So, there are multiple layers that build up, and that's what keeps you protected. So, if you're immunocompromised, make sure that you get Evusheld. And I'm surprised the number of people who've never heard about it, because, it's something that doctors should be out there promoting very actively to anybody who has immunocompromise of any way, shape, or form. So I do think, it's important that you receive that as well.
Real quick question from a viewer: can Evusheld be taken at the same time as Paxlovid?
They'll probably separate it to some extent. The Paxlovid, while it's operating, is pretty strong, and is really, holding the virus at bay, basically. And for most people, a 5-day course of Paxlovid clears it. There are some people it doesn't. Tony Fauci being one who actually ended up getting two rounds of Paxlovid before he finally cleared it. But it is fairly effective, and you can do the Evusheld after that. But again, check with your doctors. Your doctors are the ones who basically, should know about this, and you should be talking to about this. And like I say, if your doctor doesn't know about it, either force them to learn about it or go find another doctor who does know about it and can prescribe it for you, because you should be receiving it if you're immunocompromised. It's one of the few monoclonal antibodies that has held up very well against all the variants. It still works against BA5. Okay, it's lost a little bit of effectiveness against BA5, but not much. It's still actually quite effective if you're using
it. This afternoon, my wife and I had to go into Long's, and they have a table set up when you walk in. And I said, "Hey, what are you giving away?" She said, "Jobs." They've resorted to a table giving away free candies for people to apply for jobs. And the reason I bring that up is because with the lack of the government's proactive or the messaging about how important it is to mask, which really allows this virus to spread, and then you combine that with, and I really wanted to get both of your takes on this 5-day. We're hearing more and more now that the infectious period of these strains last way beyond 5 days, and they're having people come back into the workplace. And we understand why that was done. Starting with the airlines and everything else, but the hospitals are being affected by people that have been exposed and have to stay out in isolation. But what are your thoughts on this 5-day return to work? Knowing, in fact, someone, I think it was Kiala that just said hold on here, let me try and see if I can find it. It's day 9 and they're still testing positive here. My husband is still testing positive, and today is day 9. What are your thoughts? And again, CDC, but should we be allowing people to run around and, yeah, you got to wear a mask for 5 days, but how much is that contributing to the spread of infection by allowing people to leave isolation in 5 days?
Let me throw one word out there. The entire policy is insipid. It makes no sense whatsoever. In fact, the recent studies have shown that, in fact, an Omicron infection lasts longer than a Delta infection. And these people reporting that they're so positive at day 9, day 10, day 14, these are not uncommon. We're seeing a lot of reports similar to this. What the policy should be is probably something akin to what they have in the UK, which is you isolate for 7 days, and then you only come out in public after you've had 2 successive negative rapid antigen tests 24 hours apart. That's what Biden's using, actually. I don't know if you've noticed that. Biden is coming out of isolation now. He's had 2 days of negative test. Okay, although with him, we've got to watch for the Paxlovid rebound, which does occur in some cases. So he needs to be monitored very carefully over the next several days. But fundamentally, the requirement ought to be that you have 2 negative tests separated by 24 hours before you come out of isolation. Because the negative tests are a pretty good indication that you don't have a level of virus that is likely to be infectious. And that should be the only requirement that we have. Instead, we've got this foolish 5-day requirement. And then, yes, we tell people to mask up for the next 10 days, but how many people actually do that? I can tell you, I know we've got mask mandates at work, and I can tell you there's a whole lot of people running around without their mask on. And I'm not particularly happy about it either. Because, it shows disrespect for your coworkers. It shows a lot of things that shouldn't be happening at this point. If a workplace has mandated that masks continue to be used, they should continue to be used. And it's just a matter of respect for your coworkers.
That's kind of what I said in the beginning of the show. It's just being respectful. People still coming to work with sneezing and coughing, but no, it's just a cold. They don't test, and they're spreading the virus.
Well, that's a management problem, Mel.
Yeah,
if they're coming in and they're coughing and hacking, their managers ought to kick them out of the office immediately.
I agree.
Any of my employees comes in and they're coughing and hacking, I guarantee you they're out the door. I will escort them to the door.
With a mask.
Of course, with a mask.
Dr. Lee.
Well, one of the problems in this loop is that the CDC sets its recommendations, and they say, these are just recommendations, but people on the local level will actually set policy. But then what actually happens on the local level is people say, well, we're following the CDC recommendations. And so the CDC is a de facto, market maker in terms of what the local policies are going to be, because people always go back to when they need to justify it to their local citizenry, they go back to the CDC recommendations. There was no new science when the CDC came out with its 5-day isolation recommendation. There was no new science behind it. It was surely it was at the when the Omicron was becoming so overwhelming in numbers that so many people were out sick that they did this not as a center for disease control, but a center for workforce control, and it was no longer taking public health into account, but it was taking the needs of employers into account, and no longer managing for reducing transmission, but managing for reducing workforce outages. And I don't think the CDC has any business tempering its public health recommendations based on these other factors. And recently I saw that the median time of infectiousness was 8 days. And that means after 8 days, half of people are still infectious with BA5. And I think that was even the source of that was the CDC itself. So there was no scientific basis behind it. And so, I think we're seeing mass effects. And we're seeing contagion at the level of policy, and we're seeing herd duplicity in terms of the way that the leadership are calibrating their actions based on what others are doing, not on the science, but nobody wants to be the last one holding up for some particular kind of public health protection. But with these high numbers and heading into opening up the schools without a mask mandate, there was no science that came out that said the schools don't need to have masks to protect the kids. There was no science that motivated that policy change. It was entirely this edict coming from the top of government that we are no longer in emergency mode, that we are shifting into disease management mode. Well, the problem is that COVID doesn't read the governor's memos about this, and that the the pandemic didn't change along with the policy, and so the hospitals are in emergencies, even though the governor said we're not in emergency mode anymore. The hospitals are in emergency. There's a disconnect, a denial of reality, and that's going to cause tremendous, sickness and suffering and dysfunction. So I think we have the governor, who has the one with the power here, has to realize, yeah, we're back in emergency mode. We've never really left, and let's get the appropriate public health measures to match it.
Well, in a week or less than a week or whenever next week, kids go back to school. And they're going to go back to school without a mask mandate. Some kids will continue to wear the mask until they start getting teased or bullied by others, and then the masks will come off. And then factor in 40%, and correct me if I'm wrong, 40% asymptomatic infections, where 40% of the people that are infected don't even know it. And it's not limited to adults. It could be children. It could be teachers. Factor in the fact that the state did absolutely nothing about ventilation, even though they were provided funding. And we'll start with you, Dr. Brown. What do you think we can expect from the return of our students to schools without a mask mandate?
I expect the introduction of BA5 into a large number of multi-generational households in Hawaii. Schools without masks are basically going to spread COVID very rapidly. Our younger kids in particular have a relatively low vaccination rate, and we know the vaccinations actually don't prevent infection particularly well. They're still good at preventing illness, but they're not great at preventing infection. So without the mask, basically we're going to see a lot of transmission in the schools, and that transmission will go home with the kids. And I agree with you. I think there are real issues. Even the kids want to wear a mask. I think they are going to face a lot of teasing. And if the schools do not have a zero tolerance policy on that, which is to say, you tease another kid about a mask, you go home. You basically get suspended and sent home. I mean, that should be the policy at the schools. The other thing I think the schools should be seriously thinking about is segregating classes into masked classes and unmasked classes. Now, this would be a logistical nightmare, but frankly, if I was a parent sending my kid to school, I want my kid in class with other kids wearing masks. I do not want my kid in an unmasked class because I consider that to be a hazard, both to my children and to my family. And so, like I say, it's a logistical nightmare, but they should be thinking along those lines and offering parents that option. The other option would be, homeschooling, which is not desirable. It denies kids socialization. It creates a whole lot of additional issues and so on. But I do think that, it's a preferable alternative to sending kids into a situation where they are going to get infected. And I really have problems with that. And, and it just makes no sense. The governor had it completely correct a couple months ago when he said the reason we're keeping the mask in schools is to keep the kids in school. If our goal is really to keep kids in school, masking is the best way to do that. Absolutely the best way to keep kids in school.
What else is a logistical nightmare is when you're missing a lot of absences of children and teachers. That will become a horrific logistical nightmare as well. But I guess again, this state has a strategy of hope, right? They hope that they won't get mass exposures and mass infections. They hope, but the science tells us that it will happen. That's the nature of this virus.
And at the risk of anthropomorphizing a virus, the virus hopes that they keep doing that too.
Yeah. We're playing right into the hands of the virus, man. Dr. Lee.
Yeah, that people have to understand this virus is like the biggest con artist that we've run into in our lifetimes as far as a disease go. Okay, so one of its cons is being asymptomatic in 40% of the time. So people don't know that they are sick and transmitting it. Another con is that the fraction of people that die is small relative to the fraction that get infected, but large in terms of an entire population. But it's small enough that people's psychological denial mechanisms can kick in and say it's just the flu, it's just a cold. All right, so that's another of the big cons. And I don't know, those are the two big ones. So this is an expert, this virus, at getting past not only individual immune defenses, but our societal public health defenses. Now, when you see various arguments that are wrong, it's because they're denying some part of reality. Okay, so the common argument is that in terms of masking in schools, that parents should decide whether their children mask or not. So what's the reality that that's denying? Okay, it's denying the fact that their kid, it's not just their kid getting COVID, it's their kid giving COVID. All right, and so they're looking at their child simply as a consumer of COVID and not as a producer who can endanger the children and their families that are in the classroom with them. So, would we say that parents should have the power to decide whether their children bring knives to school or not? Of course not, because the knife is, if you made an argument, well, the kids should be able to protect themselves, so they should be able to have knives if their parents say so. Problem is, the knife is also a weapon that can hurt others, and that's why I'm sure that the schools have policies prohibiting the students from carrying knives. So it shouldn't be the parent's decision whether the student should carry a knife to school. In the same way, it shouldn't be a parent's decision whether their student can endanger other students with transmission of COVID. So when you see an argument that looks wrong, that doesn't make sense, ask yourself what part of the reality is being denied here. And I think you'll get the answer pretty quickly.
See, that's what happens when you have scientists and mathematicians on the show. You see how analytical. I mean, the analogy is great, but yeah, the concepts. Most of us not familiar. You really get us thinking. It's pretty cool. Appreciate that. No, it really is.
Well,
But
I think
again, we heard from Doctor, and I mentioned this earlier from Doctor Jerome Kim that the masks protect others more than it protects yourself, and I think that's what we're finding. So yes, it's about protecting others. It's about my child, who I have instructed to wear their mask. I, I, by someone else's decision to not wear a mask, places my child at risk, places other people at risk. That is why you have rules to protect others. And it baffles me that some parents believe that their freedoms or their child's freedoms, that it affects the psychology or the emotional state of the kids. And you talk to the parents, their kids are not having issues because they have to wear a lightweight mask in class while they're indoors. It's not wearing a mask for 8 hours without taking them off. They go in the playground. I don't know, Dr. Brown. What do you think? Like, it's some people just don't think.
well, it doesn't make sense from an epidemiological point of view. Uh, Schools are clearly places in which COVID spreads substantially. In the UK, where basically they refused to put any protections in place for children in the schools, they ended up with over 75% of the kids getting infected with COVID over the end of basically during the Omicron waves through the end of the last school year there. So, we can deny the epidemiological reality as much as we want. And like I say, that just makes for a very, very happy virus, which is finding many, many, many opportunities to spread itself around the classroom and then to go home with the kids and spread it around the family and locate grandma and grandpa and hit the kapuna. I mean, it just opens the door to a lot of additional infections. And the other thing that I'm really finding kind of ridiculous about this whole discussion is why aren't we talking about the impacts in the workplace of these no mask policies? The hospitals are the most obvious example. They're on the brink right now. They're losing 1,000 healthcare workers a day, basically, to illness and forced isolation because of exposure. But a whole lot of other workplaces are having the same problem. We have restaurants complaining about they can't find enough workers as it is. Well, their situation's made even worse when a substantial number of their workers are going out sick with COVID on a fairly regular basis. Every workplace, basically, I think, in Hawaii is suffering from this excessive absence problem now, with a lot of people going out sick, or we're ending up with people doing stupid things like coming into work sick and spreading it around, which then just creates more absence in the future. So, I mean, there's got to be a pretty substantial economic impact of that as well. These COVID hospitalizations that are occurring, yes, they are not as severe as hospitalizations in the past were. So far, fortunately, there doesn't appear to be as much lung involvement. And a lot of that is basically probably due to the vaccines and past exposure, as well as to properties of Omicron, uh, and that those shortcut the infections before they can get more serious. Omicron also infects the upper bronchial passages rather than going into the lungs as much as previous variants did. But there's no guarantee that's going to hold. There's absolutely nothing that says that another variant won't evolve and pop out sometime in the next 3 to 6 months that does go back to infecting lung tissue. Now, there, probably the vaccines will provide a lot more protection because the vaccines give you a fairly broad protection against severe illness and death because they're activating the T cells and basically setting up your T cell immunity. So hopefully we won't end up with the kind of severe things we had in the first phase of the epidemic. But for people who aren't vaccinated or who have managed to avoid COVID exposure at that point, if a nastier variant comes, then they will be in real trouble. And I think if we're going into societies which aren't prepared to mask when it becomes necessary, which is certainly the situation right now, then I think we're just setting ourselves up for problems in the future. So I think let's look realistically at what's the impact on the economy right now in terms of lost labor, lost sick days, and in fact, what are our sick day policies? One of the real problems we've got right now is that most people don't have any sick days left. Right? If they had 10 sick days a year, hey, 2 bouts of COVID, even with the 5-day rule, basically that wipes out your sick leave for the year. And so after that, you're supposed to go into work sick. I mean, it's our whole problem is our entire system is set up to kind of minimize sick days to the extent possible because we don't want people being out sick. Well, we want them out sick if they're going to spread it around in the office, and then it's exacerbated even more by this shift among many employers now to what they call personal time off, where you combine a person's holidays with their sick days and just it's one big pool. And then you say, well, if you need more sick days, you just take that. But people aren't going to do that because then it cuts into their holidays. So, I mean, the policies that we're putting in place in the workplace actually encourage people, I think, to come in sick. And that's a real issue and a real problem. And so I think that, we're disregarding the impacts of, and frankly, I think compared to the cost that we're talking about with all these additional hospitalizations, with all these additional sick days off and time off, those are relatively minor compared to the cost of masking. I really don't see the masking as that bad.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I don't see the mask mandate as a terrible inconvenience when you're in the middle of a major surge. No one's talking about lockdowns. No one's talking about curfews. We know what this virus is capable of. We know on Kauai, in fact, when the cluster reports come out, that many of the clusters were in schools while we had a mask mandate. That's just because kids are kids. So I am afraid of. I'll be honest with you. If I had a child in school, I would not send them. Me personally, Mel Raposo, would not send my child to school. unless he or she was older and could deal, past the teasing stage. But I wouldn't send my elementary kid to school because I know what kids do and I know how kids act and I know the masks would be off in a heartbeat. And again, these we're in Hawaii. Multi-generational households are common. Junior is going to go see grandma and grandpa and auntie and uncle. I don't get it. I don't understand why our leaders are so scared to reinstate the mask mandates. And I'm not talking about just schools. I'm talking about bars and restaurants and congregations and wherever else. A lot of jurisdictions on the mainland, California, have gone back to the mask mandates. Even I don't know if you watch late night talk shows like Kimmel and the other Jimmy Kimmel and whatever. You notice the audience all masked. They have a requirement for masks in those studios. What does that tell you? It tells you that this virus is for real and it's still active. And we're going to send our kids into a very dangerous situation. And again, like you all said, maybe not for the kids themselves, but for the people that they will potentially infect. So,
well, I think it's kind of telling if you actually look at if you go to the DOH website, they do put up mortality data. You can actually pull up the details on the 23 people who died in the last week. And all except 2 of them are basically people above age 50. And the vast majority of them are in their 70s and 80s. So, yeah, the kids are going to bring it home and they are going to infect our kapuna. There's virtually no question of that. And our kapuna are at high risk of severe outcomes, even if they are vaccinated. So I think, it really is foolish to act like there's no virus in the community.
I think it should be noted that a fully vaccinated and boosted 70-year-old has about as much mortality rate as a completely unvaccinated 50-year-old. I'm not sure on the exact age comparisons, but it's roughly that. In other words, as you can get as vaccinated as you can, and you're 70 years old, and it's only going to give you so much protection that is comparable to a completely unvaccinated younger person. So you can't roll your age back. So what do we do to protect the older people here?
And I think the other thing for older people to keep in mind, each of these new variants that is coming out basically has increased immune escape. The reason that they are becoming the dominant variant is because they are working around the immune protections that we have built up to this point. And that includes immune protection from vaccines, and it includes immune protection from previous infection. So it's working around those things. And the elderly are particularly vulnerable to that because their immune systems are weaker. As you age, your immune system weakens. And so you are much more susceptible to severe outcomes. Even like Lee says, if you are vaxxed, if you are, and you're basically being careless, not masking, et cetera, you may still get a breakthrough infection that proves lethal. And, people are disregarding that, I think, at their risk.
Wow.
So if I could continue,
Absolutely.
So there's clearly been a contagion of public policy of getting rid of public health protections. All right, and it's spread around, and not every political region was as vulnerable to this policy virus as others. So there's diversity in terms of how quickly people got rid of public health protection. So Hawaii, as I understand, was the last municipality to keep the mask mandates for students in the schools. So I think that speaks well for the general culture of Hawaii in terms of following the science and staying with protective public health policies. But then eventually, even our state succumbed to this policy virus. So, but now, just as the schools are about to resume without a mask mandate, other municipalities are readopting the mask mandate. So that depends on, the local courage of the leadership combined with their sticking to science and basing their policy on science. So, when you follow the policy landscape, what you're seeing is a manifestation of the local political forces, but one of them is how strongly science-based are the local leaders, and how courageous are they to demand a science-based policy in the face of diverse public opinions about it. So, this is where leaders aren't just powerful, but they're expected to lead, that we endow them with their powers in the hopes that they're going to use them wisely. And what we're seeing is the wisdom is being knocked out by these policy viruses that different political regions have different susceptibilities to. Now, so one thing I don't understand, it would seem that it would make more sense, instead of having to decide, all right, our mask mandate, we're going to start the masks now, or we're going to stop the masks now, is to lay out objective criteria for when you need to have an indoor mask mandate. So then once you lay out the objective criteria, hopefully they'll have a scientific basis to it. Then the numbers simply generate trigger whether or not you're going to have the mask mandate indoors. So what I would strongly advocate is that the Hawaii Department of Health set an objective standard for when inside mask mandates shall be reactivated and when they'll be deactivated. And so that's determined not then by the particular whims of the decision maker, but by what's going on in the pandemic. It really should be tied to the numbers in the pandemic. So I would like to see that. And I think given the current high rates of infection, we never should have gotten rid of the mask mandate. If it got as low as some of the troughs before the Delta and the Omicron wave, then I think if you go by those numbers, that could make a reasonable justification for inactivating the indoor mask mandate. But then you need an automatic way that if the numbers go up, it triggers the mask mandate to come in effect without having to the decision makers having to say, here's our new policy. No, here's our old policy, and that has triggered the indoor mask mandate. And if we can get the numbers down again, then the mask can come off.
Like the tier system that we had early on, right? With the tier system, the public knew. There was no guessing. There was, if we get to these metrics, we're going to move to tier 2. I agree with you 100%. And we had the mechanism was in place. It was the colored islands, right? The CDC colors, right? When the CDC said, "Whoa, Hawaii Island, Kauai Island, you're now in the red, in the hot zone," that should have triggered the reinstatement of the mask mandate. It's not a politician's decision. It's a decision based on science and data, and that's how it is. No one has to turn the switch. We hit the threshold. We're back in a mask mandate, because that would have kept the people informed, so they would, psychologically maybe be safer, and it also force them or incentivize them to be safe, so we can bring that color back down, so we can lose the mandate. I mean, it just works all the way around. But no, we leave it up to politicians, and people get sick and people die, and that's what bothers me.
Well, the problem was they followed the tier system as the numbers dropped, and they could keep getting rid of each layer of protection. When the numbers started going back up, instead of reinstating the protections, they got rid of the tier system.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly.
That's kind of how it ended up being. I mean, on Kauai, we actually went up the tier structure, and we're very strict. Kauai was different. They handled it differently. And what was the result? Very low numbers, very low hospitalizations, and almost no deaths, right? It was only after we started to open up, then we started to get hit really hard. And now, our positivity rate is, I'm not sure about today, but we're the highest in the state. So that's unfortunate. But guys, I know it's after 8. I just, if you don't mind, I just want to one last question before we wrap up, and if this is totally impromptu, so I understand if you can't answer. But monkeypox, how how worried should we be about monkeypox and with the vaccine, and is that something that and I apologize for bringing this on. I just someone asked a question in the comments. We should probably have a whole show on monkeypox, but just if you could briefly brief us on what's going on with monkeypox here in Hawaii, Dr. Tim.
As a public health policy, it's important. Uh, in terms of risk to the average citizen on Oahu right now, or I should say in the islands right now, unless you're a gay man, it's probably comparatively low. Monkeypox is not something that is transmitted the same way that COVID is. It is a close contact transmission normally. And the reason we're seeing the spread among gay men is because they have very dense sexual networks that basically allow for a lot of contacts over a relatively short period of time. And that's why we have seen the number of cases among gay men globally going up very, very radically. And to a great extent, it was probably kicked off by certain rave events that were held in a couple of European locations. And that basically seeded the global networks. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. From a public health point of view, what should be happening is we should be making vaccinations readily available to all gay men at this point. Basically, the initial hope would be that we could try to arrest the spread basically within those networks. And then we need to aggressively contact trace any infections that we pick up so that we do stamp this out. This basically can be stamped out. It is possible, if we take the appropriate precautions and the appropriate steps, that we could arrest this epidemic before it really spreads that much further. But we would have to be doing much better than we're doing in the United States right now. We're short on vaccines. We're short on testing. Testing has been far too difficult to get. Doctors have cases that meet all the criteria, but they can't get a test in some cases. They're trying to streamline this now, but they're doing it a month, almost 2 months too late. They should have been working on streamlining this a long time ago. And there is a treatment called TPOXX, but again, it's only available in relatively limited at limited levels right now. So yes, it can be dealt with. If you are a gay man at this point, start taking precautions. Be careful. There is monkeypox in the community. I think a substantial portion of those cases here in Hawaii are basically in gay men. And that is the community that has the most to worry about right now. I hope the Department of Health is working closely with gay organizations and so on to basically get the message out and make people aware. If you do have any symptoms, see a doctor immediately. They can order tests. They can get access to vaccines here, although right now I believe they're limiting vaccines only to those who've had a potential contact. But hopefully in the near future, as they are trying to do in New York, we'll be able to offer vaccines to anybody who's in a high-risk network. So something for people to be concerned about, but not overly worried about right now. COVID is much more likely to get you, to tell you the truth.
Dr. Lee?
So I'm trying to keep up to date on what is happening with this emergent monkeypox outbreak. And one of the things that I don't see mentioned is that if you're a monogamous gay man, you're at no more risk of getting monkeypox than anybody in the general population. So it's really a disease of those who are changing partners a lot. Okay, and so that a certain portion of the gay population is in that dense sexually connected network. But if you're monogamous, you're not in that network, and it really has nothing to do with you. So now, I would like to hear from Dr. Brown, because one person mentioned that with HIV, one of the strategies was simply partner reduction. And the estimates of what's the reproduction numbers of this monkeypox outbreak, the numbers have all been under 2. And so just mathematically, that means if somebody has multiple partners and they just cut the numbers in half, that would bring the reproduction number below 1, and the numbers would start to decline. And that would bring an end, if done on a mass basis, to this outbreak. So I think there needs to be more emphasis on partner reduction, and basically, at least until somebody gets the vaccine, the Jynneos, which is actually an anti-smallpox vaccine, but there's 96% genetic overlap between the core regions of smallpox and the core regions of monkeypox. So it's very, very close cousin. And so it turns out the anti-smallpox vaccine is 85% effective at stopping monkeypox, and that's what's being distributed. Now, the vaccine I got as a kid was a live attenuated vaccine, and that has a higher complication rate, and so people are not wanting to use those in this monkeypox outbreak. But the U.S. government has stockpiles of the old attenuated live virus vaccine in case of a biowarfare attack of smallpox. Whereas the Jynneos, which is much safer, is still in limited numbers. So otherwise, I think right now the risk is very small to the general public of getting monkeypox. I think the worst case scenario is that there may be some kind of other contact networks, such as kids tumbling with each other in the playground, in which the monkeypox could have a sustained transmission. But in my reading of the literature, I've never seen any incidents of a monkeypox outbreak in schools where kids are transmitting in schools. On the other hand, there was never an outbreak of monkeypox like this, an international outbreak. So it's possible that something is new under the sun in terms of what this virus is doing. So I guess I would say stay up to date on the latest scientific developments, and if you're in a position to reduce the number of partners, do that, and that's the surest way to protect yourself, at least until getting vaccinated. So.
Yeah, let me say a little bit in terms of our experience with HIV in gay communities. And I think, part of the problem we've got is that people assume that there needs to be only one messaging strategy, that we need to tell everybody the same thing. The reality is we need, just like in advertising, you need messaging strategies that are targeted to the different affected communities. And that means that, yes, you do need certain strategies that are going to reach gay men, that are going to work probably through their organizations, the gay organizations that are working in public health, the gay organizations that work in community solidarity and building support. Those are the organizations through which to try to reach the gay community. You're not going to reach them. You can reach them to one extent with large messages in the public that say, basically, watch out, be careful. If you do notice any symptoms, seek treatment immediately, and so on. But you really need to be focusing within the gay community itself to reach that community most effectively. And that's one of the lessons we've learned in HIV. Just outright strategies of telling people to reduce partners generally have not been effective. Instead, what you need to do is you need to tailor those messages to people. And, stress. Look, right now we have a monkeypox outbreak that is occurring within our community. We basically need to address that right now. And that means, at least for the short term, yes, think about cutting down on your contacts. Be much more careful. Watch for any symptoms. If you do see symptoms, get treated. If you do develop symptoms, cooperate with the contact tracers and help them to locate other people. Because if we give people that vaccine within 4 days of their infection, we can actually reduce virtually all of the effects in many, many cases. So you need a strategy that really targets the community very directly and addresses their needs. I think for the general public, the warning at this point is just be aware that it's out there. It is not spreading in schools. It is not spreading in any other settings that we know at this point. There may end up being some spread in close household contacts from sharing of towels, sharing of sheets, things like that may occur. But again, they are limited. And that's where I say our public health response needs to be very strong. if we do detect infections outside of those affected networks right now, frankly, we need to contact trace the hell out of those infections. We need to know where they came from. We need to backtrack up the chain and basically make sure everybody along that chain is vaccinated and everybody in contact with that chain is vaccinated. That's how we will arrest this. And basically, I still firmly believe we can actually arrest this epidemic if we act seriously and fast enough. And I sincerely hope the government gets those vaccines moving. I know 300,000 have been held up in a warehouse in Denmark because the FDA couldn't get its act together and basically approved them. But now I believe those have been released and they're on the way to the US. But even in New York, they can't get enough vaccine basically for the gay men who want to receive a vaccination right now. So we still do have a shortage there. And that's why here I believe we are limiting them basically to very high risk gay men or men who have actually had direct contacts. But again, if you've got any indication of symptoms or any rashes that seem unusual or something, see a doctor, get a test, and if necessary, they'll get you the treatment. They'll get you the vaccines or the treatment.
I know I said that was the last question, but I had a follow up because we have seen reports of infants, women, females, and possibly bisexual relationships. I don't know. I haven't studied this, but as far as the children that are getting monkeypox, it's close contact. It doesn't have to be sexual contact, I'm assuming,
exactly.
Right? Okay.
No, it could be shared towels. It could be shared bed sheets. It's basically a virus that is not that easy to transmit. But if you are in a close contact situation with somebody, living in the household, sharing clothing, sharing bed, sharing towels, and so on, then it can be transmitted by those methods. Okay, and that's why I say, if we detect infections outside of the gay community right now, we need to contact trace the hell out of them. We need to make sure that they stop right there, that they don't generate any additional chains that go any further. And that's the way that we basically can hopefully get back to eradicating this thing. The thing we actually have to worry about most is that it establishes itself in an animal reservoir, because that is basically how it spreads in Central Africa. It basically is resident in a large number of animal species, and most of the transmission in those countries is actually from contact with those animals. And that is actually what produces the infections. And so if it were to establish itself in the US, for example, in a rat species or something of that sort, then we could just see ongoing reintroduction. It's still not going to produce this massively rapidly spreading epidemic outside of high contact communities. But it could end up being an endemic problem that we have to deal with on a routine basis. And if we can stop it now, this is the time to stop it before it gets established. And I should point out, we have actually had one outbreak in the United States that was related to prairie badgers. I think it was Utah. And basically what happened was those prairie badgers got infected by animals that were imported from Central Africa to a pet shop. And then they infected their human parents, if you will. Okay, so basically that was an animal to human transmission that occurred, and it was a contained outbreak. I think it was about 60 something infections, and they basically managed to contain that and completely eradicate it. But we don't want to have to deal with that on a routine basis if it establishes itself, for example, in a rat species in New York City or something. Then we can expect that we'll be seeing, ongoing cases over a long period of time. So we really do want to stop this one now. And that's why I believe the Biden administration, as of today, the headlines are saying they're talking about declaring it a public health emergency. I hope they do that and then bring the appropriate measures to bear so that we can wipe out this epidemic before it gets started.
Woo! Time to bring out the plastic bubble. You remember that movie, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble? I mean, damn.
Kid had some good ideas.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, I feel like I almost got to wear a mask and gloves and a rubber suit. Just go outside.
Well, Mel, if you run down to the airport, they do have those luggage wrapping services. Maybe you can get them to wrap you up.
Well, I, I saw the news, the lines at the airport in Maui. I see that every day here on Kauai. I try to pass the airport every day around lunchtime because I think we have like 5 or 6 mainland flights all at the same time. So thousands of people at the terminal. You know, maybe 10% of them have a mask on, and all I can think about is, I mean, how what a super spreader
Mm.
event every single day of the week, and they're either taking it back with them or they're bringing it in from wherever they're coming from, and we ask ourselves, why can't we get rid of COVID? Well, that is why, people. That is why. Simple mask wearing mandate at airports, in terminals, in airplanes. We saw the results. We saw what the benefit, but that'll not happen. So anyway,
I want to address one thing, Mel, that you quoted
sure.
from Dr. Kim, which is that masks, they don't protect you, but they protect others. That that they protect others more than you. Well, it depends on the mask. So, the cloth masks were pretty good at intercepting the large droplets that would be breathed out before they turned into aerosol. They were better at that than blocking aerosol that was coming in. But the N95 masks, if you get them to fit nicely around your nose in particular, will protect you as much as you protect others. And so I think it's important to not oversimplify the idea of what masks can do, because I mean these are protecting um, the healthcare workers that work with COVID patients, and they do it quite effectively. And so, and this again is a 3M N95 mask that this costs. You can get it for less than $1 now, and so, I would advocate for not only everybody having these things. I wish the federal government would mail a set of 4 to everybody every week, so that these would be just so plentiful, everybody would use them. But getting people to learn to wear them competently, and then they will protect you um, as much as they are protecting others. But if you're in an area that nobody's masking and the air is completely contaminated with COVID particles and aerosol, then you have to do this perfectly to protect yourself really well, and that makes it harder on everybody. Anybody's imperfections in how well they fit the N95 mask to them will be much more penalized when nobody around you is masking. So it really pays to have a mask policy. So I hope that little footnote was of value.
No, it was. Thank you very much. I appreciate the clarification. The quality and the proper wearing of the mask is key. Please, guys. I see I see masks. I just why wear a mask if you're gonna put it below your nose? Really, why wear a mask if you're why? I mean, it's like I don't get it. But anyway, gentlemen, thank you again. Appreciate you guys so much. I don't know where we'll be next week. Um, hopefully we get hopefully the news continues to get better. And I'm worried about our kids going to school. I'm worried about the minimization of the dangers that can happen when all our kids get back in classrooms. So it's unfortunate.
The question I
But
had for Dr. Brown is are the schools going to continue to monitor the cases as well as they have been, so that at least we could see if the end of the mask mandate is having a substantial effect in increasing transmission? At least we could see it. Will they?
I was about to ask that same question, and I
Uh,
don't know the answer to it.
well,
Uh,
the DOE they do they are required. Whether or not that will change, I don't know. But they are required to report the
mm,
cases that comes out of the schools, and there is a report that is publicly available. I haven't looked at that obviously for quite a while, but yeah, it will be monitored, and hopefully, uh, hopefully they take action based on the numbers. I hate to talk like this because it seems like I'm a negative Nancy, but we know what this virus will do. That's one thing that is not in dispute. We know what will happen. It's happened every time we've lifted a mask mandate. Um, and according to Dana, DOH discontinued contact tracing. So I was talking about the reporting though, the cases that are reported.
Well, I actually just looked at their website. They are still reporting. They've been reporting consistently through the summer, although at very low rates.
Yeah.
Because of course school's out, so it's just the summer programs I assume they're reporting on. But I believe that was a legislative requirement, so I think it will probably continue going forward, unless they add a sunset on it, which I doubt. So hopefully they'll continue to report that, and we'll be able to see what happens over the next couple of weeks as they open the schools.
All right. Well, Dana says they're backing off on reporting. We shall see. I think that is where we as citizens and residents and parents come in to make sure we demand. I remember now, election is still a far way out, guys. August 13th is a primary, but the general isn't until November. So now is the time to confront these people that are running for office in your districts and asking them the questions, asking them to commit. Ask them now. Don't wait till they're elected. Ask them now, get a commitment, and if they cannot commit, don't vote for them. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, doctors. Please come back. So, yeah, I love when these guys come on. I get educated. I learn so much, and I hope we can make it a regular thing. I'll reach out to you guys to see if you guys can come on next week, Wednesday, as well. But until then, folks, tomorrow night for the village, we got Jill Tokuda coming on. She'll be coming on, sharing her story and her platform and her reasons why she's running for Congress. As you guys know, I've put the call out to any politician, except for one, that can come on our show and share their story and their platform. And very few have taken me up on it, but we do have Jill coming on tomorrow night. So please join us. Come with your questions. We will be taking questions live. And hopefully we'll see what happens. And then Friday, we won't have a show. We're moving Friday to tomorrow. And then obviously next week is a new week, and we'll see what interesting topics to talk about. So Dr. Lee, Dr. Tim, thank you again. You guys have an amazing evening and a great rest of the week, and we will talk soon. All right, guys. Take care. God bless. We love you guys.
Take care, everyone.